Jim was performing When the Music's Over at the Hollywood Bowl when a fan threw a piece of paper with lyrics written on it onto the stage. Words he had written himself, but there was a note written in red pen underneath. What happened next stunned the 17,000 people in attendance. Morrison read the paper, slowly placed the microphone on the ground, and left the stage without saying a word, never returning that night. October 14th, 1968. The Hollywood Bowl had vanished into the night. The Doors had already played Hello, I Love You, Light My Fire, and The Crystal Ship. But in the middle of When the Music's Over, Morrison's voice was more fragile than ever, as if each word was painful. But what no one knew was this. The person who threw the paper wasn't just a fan. Seated in the third row on the right side of the stage was a man, Morrison's former poetry professor at UCLA, Thomas Brennan, the man who had read Jim's first poems, now watching his son's stage persona. Before continuing to listen to this story, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the unknown truths about Jim Morrison and rock music. C. Something broke that night at the Hollywood Bowl. After Morrison left the stage, Ray Manzarek, Robbie Krieger, and John Densmore looked at each other in shock. Where did Jim go? What happened? The crowd was silent at first, then began to murmur, then shout, "We want our money back. Where is Morrison?" But Morrison was gone. He hadn't even gone backstage. He had walked straight to the parking lot, got in his car, and disappeared. Bill Siddons, the Doors manager, spent hours that night searching the streets of Los Angeles for Morrison, but couldn't find him. Morrison wasn't answering. His phone was off. Even Pamela Corson didn't know where he was. But the real question was, what was written on that paper? 17,000 people watched that stage, but only Morrison read that paper. The paper thrown onto the stage remained in Morrison's hand, and no one saw it again. Ray Manzarek said years later in an interview, "When Jim read that paper, his face turned as white as a sheet. It was as if he had seen a ghost. I don't know what was written on that piece of paper. Jim never said. But whatever it was, it destroyed Jim. The Jim before that night and the Jim after that night were different people. Morrison didn't perform for 3 months after that night. 3 months, 90 days. The Doors canceled their concerts. Elektra Records panicked. Fans were shocked. The press speculated. Had Morrison gone mad? Was Morrison dead? Was Morrison using drugs? But the truth was something no one knew. Morrison had simply disappeared. He was hiding in a motel in Venice Beach, reading that piece of paper every day. When Bill Siddons finally found Morrison, the sight terrified him. Morrison had lost 15 pounds. His beard had grown long. His eyes were dull. And he still had that piece of paper in his hand. Wrinkled, torn, but still there. Have you ever thought about it? A sentence that completely changes you, turns your life upside down. A word. A note. For Morrison, that piece of paper was it. But what did it say? Here are the theories. Theory 1. That piece of paper had Morrison's own lyrics written on it. People are strange. But underneath was a question. Do you really believe these words? Or are you just saying them to make money? Morrison always struggled with authenticity. Was the Lizard King persona his true self, or just a mask? If that question was on that piece of paper, Morrison's reaction makes sense, because Morrison's greatest fear was being a fraud. And if a fan, even a former UCLA professor, called Morrison a fraud, it would destroy him. Theory 2. That paper contained an excerpt from a letter Morrison wrote to his father, but never sent. The relationship between Morrison and his father had broken down. Morrison told everyone his father was dead, but he was actually alive. And if that paper contained Morrison's most private, most painful words, we can understand why Morrison broke down. His private pain would have been thrown onto a public stage. Think about it. How would you feel if your deepest, darkest thoughts were thrown back at you in writing? Theory 3. That paper contained the first draft of Morrison's suicide note. In 1968, Morrison was struggling with suicidal thoughts. His alcohol consumption had increased. His depression had reached its peak. And if Morrison had tried to write a suicide note at some point, and that note had somehow leaked, it would have completely shattered him. Because then everyone would have known. Morrison wasn't just a dark poet. He was a man who truly wanted to die. But which is true? No one knows. Because Morrison never showed that paper. Bill Siddons asked. Ray Manzarek asked. Pamela asked. But Morrison didn't answer. He just said, "That paper is mine, and it will stay that way." Morrison took that paper to Paris in 1971, and when he died, Pamela found that paper while gathering Morrison's belongings. But she didn't read it. Because it was Morrison's last wish. He had said that paper would be buried with him, and Pamela respected that. She placed that paper in Morrison's coffin, and now that paper is in the Père Lachaise cemetery, in Morrison's grave, underground. Secret forever. But the story doesn't end there, because those 3 months changed Morrison. What did Morrison do during those 3 months in that motel in Venice Beach? He wrote. He wrote every day. He wrote poetry. He wrote a diary. He wrote song lyrics. And he realized something. The words on that paper had destroyed him, but they had also liberated him. Because Morrison was no longer hiding. He wasn't wearing a mask anymore. He wasn't the Lizard King anymore. He was just Jim. And Jim wanted to write, not sing, not perform, just write. When Bill Siddons visited Morrison at that motel, Morrison showed him hundreds of pages, poems, stories, thoughts. Bill said, "These are incredible. Why aren't you publishing them?" Morrison replied, "Because they're mine, not for the stage, not for money, just mine." And Bill understood. Morrison no longer wanted to be a rock star. He wanted to be an artist. But the problem was, the Doors were a rock band, and the Doors couldn't exist without Morrison. Ray Manzarek, Robbie, and John wanted Morrison back. Elektra Records wanted Morrison back. The fans wanted Morrison back. But didn't Morrison want to come back? That's when Pamela Corson stepped in. Pamela found Morrison at that motel and said, "Jim, what are you doing? You're destroying yourself. That paper destroyed you, but you're still alive. And to live means to go out there. It means facing people. It means getting on stage." Morrison replied, "But that paper was right, Pamela. I'm fake," Morrison cried. Perhaps for the first time in his life, at least in front of Pamela, he really cried. And Pamela held him. And she said, "You're not fake, Jim. You're scared. And that's normal. But fear can't stop you." 3 months later, Morrison returned to the stage. January 14th, 1969. Whiskey A Go Go. A small venue, only 500 people. Morrison took the microphone on stage and said, "I've been gone for 3 months. Don't ask why. But I'm here now." And that night, Morrison's performance was different, more sincere, more fragile, more real. The Lizard King was gone. Only Jim remained, and the fans noticed. This Jim was different. This Jim was deeper. This Jim was more painful, but this Jim was more real. Ray Manzarek never forgot that night. He said, "When Jim returned to the stage, he was no longer the old Jim. The old Jim was dead. The new Jim was born. And was the new Jim better? I don't know. But he was more honest. Whatever that paper said, it killed Jim and reborn him. And maybe that was a good thing. But Miami came. February 1969, a month later. Morrison used his newfound freedom. He used it too much. At the Miami concert, Morrison pushed the boundaries. Nudity allegations, arrest, court. Everything went south. And maybe that paper was to blame for that too, because Morrison thought he had nothing left to lose. That paper had already destroyed him. Miami was just the finale. So what do you think was written on that paper? Write it in the comments. Theory 1, Theory 2, Theory 3, or something else? Maybe you know a clue. Maybe you were at the Hollywood Bowl that night. Maybe you saw that paper. Tell us. But here's the most interesting part. Was Thomas Brennan, that UCLA professor, real? Bill Siddons was surprised when he heard that name in an interview in 2015. Thomas Brennan? Was there such a person? I don't remember, he said. But maybe there was. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe it was Morrison's imagination. Maybe no one threw that paper. Maybe Morrison threw it himself. He externalized his inner voice, and then he collapsed. That's Morrison's biggest secret. What is real? What is fantasy? Morrison always walked that line. Poet and performance artist. Real and fake. Jim and the Lizard King. And that paper was perhaps a note Morrison wrote to himself. A reminder. Who are you, Jim? Who are you really? And Morrison couldn't find the answer. That's why he lost 3 months, searching for the answer. And did he find it? Maybe. Maybe not. But when he died in Paris in 1971, Morrison was still keeping that paper. It was still with him. It was still important. And what does that tell us? Some questions are never answered. Some wounds never heal. Some papers are never read. And maybe that's beautiful, because mystery is part of Morrison's legacy. If we knew everything, Morrison wouldn't be so fascinating. Now think, is there such a paper in your life? A moment that completely changed you? A word? A sentence? Maybe a breakup letter? Maybe a doctor's report? Maybe a farewell note? Whatever that paper was for Morrison, it changed him forever. And maybe there is such a moment for you too. And maybe that moment destroyed you. But maybe that moment also recreated you. Just like Morrison. Morrison's story isn't just a rock story, it's a human story. A story of fragility. A story of searching. Morrison lived 27 years, but it felt like he lived 100, because Morrison lived every moment intensely. He felt every pain deeply, and that piece of paper was perhaps Morrison's deepest pain. Realizing he had lied to himself, calling himself a fraud, unable to forgive himself. And that's why Morrison disappeared for 3 months. To forgive himself. Because Morrison was his own harshest critic. And that paper was perhaps Morrison's own voice, his own conscience, his own judge. And Morrison was convicted. Guilty. A fraud. A liar. And the punishment was 3 months of silence. But then Morrison returned. And when he returned, he was different. Less stage show, more poetry. Less Lizard King, more Jim. And perhaps that is Morrison's true legacy. Change, transformation. That paper killed Morrison, but created a better version of him. More honest, more real, more human. And today, in 2024, we're still talking about Morrison. Why? Because Morrison is universal. Morrison is all of us. We all feel fake sometimes. We all wear masks. We all fear that paper that speaks our truth. And maybe Morrison's story teaches us this. Face that paper. Read it. Cry. Disappear. But then be reborn. Because that's the only way. Not to run away. To face it. Morrison faced it. It took 3 months, but he faced it. And you? What's your paper? And when will you face it? Maybe today. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe never. But Morrison's story is there. A roadmap. A warning. A hope. Because Morrison faced it and survived. 3 more months. 2 more years. And forever in his music. That's why that paper is important. Not just for Morrison, for all of us. Because that paper is a mirror. And Morrison looked into the mirror, and he was afraid, and he ran away. But then he came back, and he looked again. And this time, he accepted it. This is who I am. Flawed, broken, but real. And that's enough. Maybe there were only 2 words written on that paper. Who are you? And Morrison couldn't find the answer. But he never stopped searching. He searched until the end of his life. Maybe he was even searching in that bathtub in Paris. The answer? Who am I? A poet? A rock star? A fraud? Real? And maybe the answer is all of the above. Morrison was all of those things, and that killed him. But it also made him immortal. Because today we remember Morrison, not just for his music, for his soul, for his fragility, for his courage, the courage to confront that piece of paper. And maybe that is his greatest legacy. Not the music, the courage. Morrison died in 1971, but that paper still lives. In Père Lachaise, under the ground. No one can read it, but everyone can feel it. The power of that paper, the weight of that paper, because we all have such a paper. And Morrison showed us, don't burn it. Keep it, read it, and confront. That's Morrison's secret. The secret on that paper. Only Morrison knows. And Morrison isn't talking, but maybe he doesn't need to, because we already know. We know from our own papers. We know from our own fears. And Morrison's story tells us this. You are not alone. Morrison was afraid too. Morrison was lost too. Morrison faced it too. And you can too.